Welcome to A Bounty of Books, where we explore prominent popular and cult literature, from timeless classics to modern masterpieces. In today's video, we'll be taking a deep dive into an early work of one of the most prolific and widely read writers in the English-speaking world. I am speaking of Stephen King. Over the last 50 years, he has been the first adult writer of many an adolescent, myself included. Of all his many works, which currently stand at a whopping 65 novels and still counting, the author has often revisited and in some cases reworked several of his early classics. The Shining, Pet Sematary, The Stand and It have all received this treatment. But in this video, we'll be taking a closer look at his seminal vampire novel, Salem's Lot, which is perhaps my own personal favourite. We'll explore its creation, the characters, plot twists, themes, and how it cemented itself as a staple of horror fiction. First, let's talk about the origins of Salem's Lot. King began writing the novel in 1972, shortly after the publication of his first book, Carrie. At the time, he was still finding his footing as a novelist and was still teaching English at a high school in Hampton, Maine, and worked tirelessly on his writing in the evenings. Inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, he arrived upon the idea of writing a modernised version of this classic story, transferring the vampire threat to the modern world. Something that may be seen as cliched now, but was actually innovative back in the 1970s. He wondered in particular how a vampire story would unfold in a small, typical American town. His idea was simple yet compelling. What if Dracula came to America? Specifically, what if a centuries-old vampire infiltrated a seemingly peaceful New England community? The book was originally entitled Second Coming, but King later changed it, considering the title too pretentious and possibly even risque. He briefly toyed with the name Jerusalem's Lot, the fictional town where the story is set, but ultimately shortened it to Salem's Lot. The eerie small town setting, inspired by his own experience living in rural Maine, became the perfect backdrop for a story that blends psychological horror with the supernatural. There are many things that could be said about King's writing and writing style, both positive and negative. One of King's evident limitations as a writer is his own apparent limited experience in the world of employment. Of his 65 novels, it's perhaps worth noting that the vast majority involve a protagonist who is one of 6 favoured professions. He or she will invariably be either a student, a teacher, a writer, an artist, a housewife, or a detective. I know that when I first started to read his novels, I would often say to myself, it's going to be a writer again, isn't it? And I was frequently right. We get plenty of these demographics in Salem's Lot too. So with that said, let's talk about the key characters and what drives them in this harrowing tale. The main protagonist is Ben Mears, and he's a writer, of course. As seen as this is King's second novel, he can be seen as the first of many, and arguably the best of all those to come. He is moderately successful and a humble individual, and while not being particularly charismatic, he is nonetheless a solid hero for us to root for. The story sees him returning to his childhood town to seek inspiration for his next novel, which is very meta. His childhood memories are, however, marred by an unsettling incident that occurred at the Marston house. Ben is driven by both personal trauma and a sense of responsibility to uncover the darkness taking over Salem's Lot. His determination to confront the evil head-on makes him unquestionably the central hero of the story. Mark Petrie is a 12-year-old boy and newcomer to the town with an obsession for horror stories. Mark's knowledge of monsters become a key weapon in the fight against the vampires. His bravery and resourcefulness far surpasses his years, and he can be viewed as a secondary protagonist. Susan Norton is a local woman who quickly becomes romantically involved with Ben. We get to learn a lot of exposition about Ben's character and the nature of the town itself through their conversations. Susan is drawn into the unfolding nightmare by her curiosity and desire to support Ben's mission. Her courage, however, comes at a tragic cost. Father Donald Callahan is the town's Catholic priest. Father Callahan is a man struggling with his faith. As the story progresses, he faces a crisis of spiritual identity when confronted by true evil, marking one of the novel's most compelling character arcs. Notably, but not uniquely in King's literary universe, his character will make a reappearance in one of King's subsequent novels. More on this later. Richard Straker is the first antagonist we get to meet in the novel. He is the human familiar and accomplice of the main antagonist, Barlow. Straker purchases the Marston Manor for his master and opens up an antique shop as a front for their activity in the town. Kurt Barlow is an ancient vampire who arrives in Salem's Lot to establish a new colony of the undead. Barlow is a cunning and ruthless antagonist, embodying the pure, malevolent force of classic vampirism. The Marston house looms large throughout the story, and can also be seen as a character in its own right, much in the same way as the Overlook Hotel is in The Shining, which was King's next novel. It is an edifice that haunts the town and its population with its very presence. It is a battery of evil, holding on to the psychic emanations of all the evil people that have inhabited it, and the equally evil acts that they have executed within its walls. The story follows Ben Mears, who returns to the small town of Jerusalem's Lot, or Salem's Lot, as the locals call it, in order to confront his childhood fears and find inspiration for his next book. Things quickly take a dark turn when the mysterious newcomers Barlow and Straker move into the notorious and abandoned Marston House, a looming and sinister mansion on the outskirts of town. As strange events begin to unfold, residents start disappearing or behaving strangely, and it becomes clear that an ancient evil is taking hold of the town. Together with a small group of allies, including Susan Norton, young monk Petrie, and the troubled priest Father Callahan, Ben embarks on a dangerous mission to confront and destroy the vampire Barlow and save what remains of the town. Salem's Lot explores several powerful themes that elevate it beyond a simple horror novel. Firstly, we have the corruption of innocence. The novel depicts the transformation of a peaceful town into a nest of vampires, symbolising the fragility of human morality and the ease with which evil can corrupt even the purest of places. Then we have isolation and community. King examines how isolation, whether physical, emotional or societal, can lead to a community's downfall. The breakdown of trust and communication in Salem's Lot make it vulnerable to external evil. Thirdly, we have faith and doubt. Father Callahan's internal struggle with his belief in God versus his fear of evil reflects the novel's deeper philosophical questions about faith and the existence of true evil. And lastly, we have human nature versus the supernatural. King juxtaposes human fears and desires with supernatural horror, blurring the lines between internal demons and external threats. The mood of Salem's Lot is one of creeping dread, isolation, and inevitable doom. King masterfully builds tension as the town slowly shifts from serene to sinister as the vampire plague spreads. For myself, what makes this novel a stand-up contribution to the horror genre is his ability to actually scare the reader. Few novels, including most of those by King himself, are actually capable of frightening a modern reader. The nature of our culture means that most of us have been exposed to creepy and disturbing books, films, and TV shows since a very young age. We are wise and perhaps even jaded by an almost continual exposure to jump scares and monsters of the week of varying hues and composition. If you have not yet read Salem's Lot, then I challenge you to read it during the autumn or winter nights on your own. You will quickly feel the power of the writing. The genius of Salem's Lot is to place the reader into an isolated corner of the modern world. We are introduced to a mundane world inhabited by perfectly familiar societal archetypes, before the scene is slowly and insidiously invaded by a hidden threat that strikes at night and only reveals its true nature gradually as the town's daytime life quickly becomes disjointed and then finally completely abandoned. It introduces us to the possibility that on its distant and poorly populated edges, our civilized world and the given norms and rules may suddenly be subverted and its laws no longer applicable. Most of us take modern transport for granted and travel far and wide these days, and perhaps we ourselves could someday unexpectedly find ourselves in a similar situation where we are abruptly left to fend for ourselves against a sinister and powerful foe with no prospect of any help coming to rescue us. Then there is the unbeating dark heart of the Marston house. The reader is taken into the chilling environment of this evil edifice several times throughout the story, and at all times there is a tangible, almost visceral sense of dread as various characters risk their lives and their very souls by venturing within its walls. The novel invites the reader to ask ourselves if we would have the moral courage to face the ultimate evil in its lair, or would we perhaps surrender to our animal instincts and flee, abandoning the town to its fate. And even if you didn't have the courage to face up to evil, in this story the evil will eventually come looking for you. Several times townsfolk are either visited by Barlow himself, or else by a recently deceased loved one who comes clawing at a window or knocking on a door, begging to be let in. In theory, even leaving the town would not guarantee that the vampire plague would not spread to further towns, moving ever outwards until it eventually catches up with you. Such is the nature of this threat. Upon its release, the novel received mixed but generally positive reviews. Critics praised its ability to modernise the vampire genre and the richly detailed small-town setting. However, some felt the novel was overly long and relied too heavily on traditional horror tropes. The novel was nominated for the 1976 World Fantasy Award for Best Novel and became a commercial success, cementing King's reputation as a master of horror. While it didn't debut at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, it steadily climbed and contributed to King's growing literary prominence. Over the subsequent years, many readers and critics have lauded the novel for its complex characters and chilling atmosphere. The novel's exploration of societal decay and human vulnerability resonates far beyond its supernatural elements. On the other hand, some critics have pointed to its slow pacing and predictable elements typical of vampire fiction. Despite these critiques, its legacy as one of the finest vampire novels ever written remains undisputed. It has long had a lasting impact on horror literature and popular culture. Its influence can be seen in subsequent vampire stories, television shows and films, not least Midnight Mass, The Strain, 30 Days of Night, Fright Night, The Lost Boys, and even Buffy, to name but a few. King's portrayal of small-town horror also became a blueprint for many of his own later works, including It, Needful Things, and Tommyknockers. The story itself was even revisited and extended in his 2003 novel Wolves of the Calla, which is part 4 of the Dark Tower series, which is where the character of Father Callahan is once more encountered and further details concerning Salem's Lot are revealed. Salem's Lot is more than just a vampire novel. It's a story about fear, faith, community, the enduring human spirit, and the fragility of civilization. Its blend of psychological horror and supernatural terror makes it a timeless classic. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of horror literature's most iconic works. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more literary explorations. See you next time on A Bounty of Books. Until then, farewell, constant reader, and remember, even the smallest towns can harbour the darkest secrets.